This month we're talking with Matt Cuthbert. He founded Haven Comics in Madison 10 years ago this week. We went to their 10-year anniversary and talked with him. And also at the end of the episode, Sharla has her app pick. So let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so it's 10 years ago today you guys started this, right?
Yes.
So what was going on at that time? It was 2001, you had just come out of UH.
Yeah, I was working at AL.com, and I was hanging out at the comic book store in town a lot, or several of them actually, because there were, I don't know, 5 or 6 comic book stores in Huntsville at the time, and I found that I was spending like 3 days a week going over there, and I always just kind of felt uncomfortable hanging out there.
So you felt uncomfortable, you kind of wanted to start your own place? Is that what started?
It was more like, it just felt too geeky for me, and not to knock any of the other shops in town, because they all had their core audience, but it just seemed like I didn't feel comfortable just hanging out there and everybody was talking, who can beat up who, or that kind of stuff, and that really wasn't what I was into. I just enjoyed reading the stories. And so we had the idea of setting up a place that where everyone would feel welcome and you wouldn't feel awkward being in there.
Yeah, so you want everybody to come to a place and feel comfortable and kind of hang out for a little while.
Absolutely, and that's kind of where the name came from too, because when I was a kid and I wanted to go to the comic book store, my mom never wanted to take me, and looking back on it now, I mean, I know why. Yeah. In that, it was a small, cramped place full of a bunch of stuff, and guys behind the counter, it looks like you don't want your kid talking to him, and, posters on the wall of scantily clad women, and it's dark and it stinks in there.
So you didn't want it to be the androids dungeon from The Simpsons.
Right. We wanted to avoid that, and we wanted to have a big, open, brightly lit store that was clean and was friendly to kids, friendly to women, and we tried to embrace that.
That's cool. I've been doing that for about 10 years now. Like, when you did this, when you were still up here, what was like some of the lessons you learned about starting a small business like this, oriented towards like kind of a geek crowd?
In Huntsville, we really lucked out because there's a lot of geek connoisseur in Huntsville. Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't use that word in a negative sense. I really think.
Well, no, I think that's totally applicable. I know what you mean.
I think there's a big geek nerd population here in Huntsville with the Space Center here, with Marshall here, with all of the engineering firms in town. There's a lot of people who are interested in this stuff. There's a big market for it. But I think what was missing was the idea that you start reading this somewhere. I mean, you start reading comics as a kid. I don't think many people pick this up as an adult. Yeah. They never walk into a comic book shop as an adult and say, I'm going to start reading X-Men. It's kids who pick this stuff up when they're 7 or 9 or whatever, and you have to find a way to make it accessible to them and to their parents who want them to be allowed to do that. Want to allow them to do that. Feel comfortable with their kids reading comics or hanging out in the store.
Let me ask you this. A lot of things are different 10 years later when you started this, because in 2011, like Marvel, DC, they're starting to go to more digital distribution. There are a lot of really cool apps on iPad and stuff like that. So if you were starting the store today, like how would you take that in mind? Would you still be pushing a lot of physical copies, or I don't know, how does that work out?
I absolutely wouldn't, but to me it wasn't even when I owned the store years ago, it wasn't about the comics themselves. We've never sold many back issues. I mean, they're here or there, but you've got to have this huge stock of back issues, and you spend a lot of money on getting all that stuff squared away, making sure you have extras each month to put back. Yeah. But you don't sell many of them because they're expensive and they're cumbersome, and you've got to treat them very carefully. And that's what we teach these kids who come in the store. I mean, you've got to put it in a plastic bag and put a cardboard piece of cardboard behind the thing. Don't read it. But it's not a collector's item, it's something you read. Yeah. So to me, what was always more fun was pushing the graphic novels, the trade paperback collections, and people really loved the idea of, you mean I can get the first 8 stories for $10 instead of paying $7 a piece for these old copies that are these rare collector's items? And that's great. Plus, you can reorder them as a store.
Yeah. So, like, changing gears a little bit, like, what are you reading these days? What's comics you're into?
I like DMZ, Fables. I'm reading Ex Machina, though that's just finished. I don't tend to read comics, actually. I just read trade paperbacks. So I'm reading stuff that people have read 6 months or a year ago, and I don't know what's on the shelves right now. I really do read the book format because it's a lot nicer having them on your shelf at home. My wife doesn't mind so much those being on the bookshelf, whereas boxes of comic books, that doesn't go over so well.
Oh, you keep those in the garage and everything?
I really don't have
You still have those,
I've
don't
got
you?
like maybe 4 small boxes at home. And
Oh.
it's stuff that, you know, someday when my girls are interested in it, they'll flip through and find my old Spider-Man or X-Men comics or some of the stuff that I've got in there. And then they'll think, this is really neat that Dad has this stuff. But if they want to read stuff, I've got plenty of books for them to read.
I know what you're saying, though, about trade paperbacks, because I started reading The Walking Dead, like, when I heard that TV show was going to be kind of a big deal. So, like, I was able to catch up so quickly on all that stuff and be kind of ahead of the game when the show came out and, like, know what changes they had made on the show and everything. It seems kind of to me as if, like, trade paperbacks are the DVD as to the actual comics themselves being, like, the movies that come out in the theater.
Right. Comics they're looked on, in some regards, as disposable. They're very cheaply made, or they used to be. They're printed on newsprint. They don't cost that much. They actually do cost a lot more now because the price of paper has gone up, the price of ink has gone way up, and they cost, I don't know what they cost now, like $3.99 a piece.
Yeah, for most of the Marvel titles, yeah.
And when I was a kid, they were 75 cents, or maybe even $1.25 for the high-end stuff.
Yeah.
But
what were they when you started about 10 years ago, on average?
they were usually, I want to say about $1.50.
Wow.
No, that's wrong. I'd say $1.99 was the low end. Maybe $2.25 was the average price, and you'd see some that were $2.75 to $2.99, but most were around $2.50, I think.
Yeah, I remember I grew up in Russellville, like near here, and the only place you could buy comics was the movie gallery. Do you remember those?
Yeah.
And they had like a small rack, and like unless you drove, you know, to here, which is about an hour away, that's the only place you could get any comics. And they had like a couple of DC titles, and they were like like $2 or something like that. But I think it's like so awesome that you like started a place like this, and not in Huntsville, but in Madison, you know, where there's not as many stores kind of like this. Is that kind of what you were headed for?
Yeah, because downtown you're looking at the same mentality of me as a kid. You got to ask your mom to drive you to the store. You don't want to go into town to go to the store. And not that there's not folks living in town, but there were already 3 comic shops in downtown Huntsville, or 4 comic shops in downtown Huntsville when we opened, and then one in Decatur and one in Athens. It just seemed like Madison was the only place that didn't have it, and this was where all the families seemed to be gravitating to back then. And it just seemed a natural fit. Like there would be a population eager for it. We didn't have to do it on their lunch break at work. They could do it while they were home on the weekend.
Yeah.
But as far as, you know, you mentioned earlier the digital comics. I haven't read them personally, and to me, I've never really been into that. I personally don't enjoy, you know, the idea of reading a book on a Nook or a Kindle or something. But I know it's really taken off. I'm not trying to say that, oh, I don't think it'll ever happen. It'll happen.
Well, it kind of is happening.
And I don't know about comics. It's a little different beast because of the collectability of it. People like to collect.
Yeah.
And I think they do like owning that little piece of it. But then at the same time, I mean, I'm playing Gowalla on my phone, and I like collecting those little stamps, and that's a virtual thing. There's not anything there. I mean, it's just...
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because I just checked into Foursquare, like right here, and it's pretty cool, because like if you check into certain places that are tagged comic book store or geek or certain things like that, you eventually get a badge like that. People really take a lot of stock into that. You feel that way about the Gowalla badges?
Oh yeah, I think so. I mean, and it's the same sort of thing as Foursquare.
Yeah. So in that same line, you know, people might have a whole folder, a whole external hard drive full of like comic books that they've stored. They still have that available to them. It's not like it's something they can hold in their hand like on paper. But you know, you can read it on your iPad, stuff like that. If you ever want to go back, it's still there. You can read it.
Right, and it goes along with what my argument is too about it's more fun to read them than it is to collect them. It really is. And if you can push reading, you've got them. If you push collecting, people are buying junk they don't really want because it might be valuable, or they're keeping something cooped up in a plastic wrapper because someday it might be valuable, and they're not really enjoying it, and it turns out they buy stuff for a few years and then they realize I'm not having any fun and they quit.
Yeah.
Whereas I think it's much more important to get them reading the stuff they like, and that was another thing we pushed in the store. Have a couch in here, encourage people to sit down and read. Pick the comics up off the wall, pick the books off on the shelf, and sit and read them for a while. If you don't like it, put it back. Don't buy it.
Yeah.
And if you subscribe to a title that you haven't liked the last 3 issues, drop it from your subscription list.
Yeah.
And try and push that, because if you encourage people to buy stuff they don't enjoy, they're just going to quit comics altogether.
That's one nice
There's
thing.
stuff out there for them.
Yeah, that's one nice thing that I've always enjoyed about Haven. It's not like, oh, you know, somebody's going to judge you depending on on what you have in your box or take up to the register. Some places in Huntsville are kind of like that. You know what I'm talking about too.
Yeah.
But here it's always been like, okay, yeah, sure, no problem. Everybody's like really easygoing about it, and I think that's why it's still here 10 years later.
Yeah, I am surprised. I mean, as much of an audience for comics as Huntsville has. I mean, when we opened, like I said, there were 4 stores downtown. There was the Deep and Jennings. There was the Comic Shop and Comic Corner, and then there was the Comic Shop 2 in Decatur. And there was actually, I mean, Hit Video Collectible could be considered a comic shop too, because they were the guys who, right? I mean, within the same few weeks that we opened Haven, opened Anime Nation or Anime Invasion. I'm not really sure.
Now, is that the one that's near the UH campus?
Yeah, I mean, when it was Hit Video Collectible, they were kind of a comic shop there too, and they branched out to open their own store too. I mean, essentially, there were like 6 stores right here in town that were doing that. But now, what's interesting, I think, is that there's only 2.
Yeah.
And that Haven's stuck around, and I hope it's because of the philosophy that Haven's had of letting people sit down, feel comfortable, read the books, and just keeping it plain and welcoming.
Absolutely. Well, listen, man, I appreciate you taking the time.
Sure.
And you're down in Birmingham these days. What do you do at AL.com?
I am a senior producer there.
Awesome. Everything's going great over there?
I love it.
I envy that job sometimes.
It's a fun job.
All right, man. Well, I really appreciate you talking to us today.
No problem.
All right, take it easy.
My name is Sharla, and I'm going to show you my latest favorite iPad application. It is Scrabble, and it's just like the real board game Scrabble. The app originally cost about $5, and I think that's still what it's selling for in the App Store. But I actually caught it on sale for $1, but even I would totally pay $5 for it. It is completely worth it. You can play now against the computer. You can create your own games, or you can even play your Facebook friends. You can play on a LAN. You can even do pass and play, where you pass it back and forth. Or if someone has an iTouch or an iPhone, they can actually play along with you on that as well, which is really, really neat. Another neat thing you can do, if you have several iPhones or iTouches, you can actually use this as the board only and use that as your tile rack, essentially. It's a really, really awesome game. I play it every single night. And this is how an actual game works. It's just like the real Scrabble again. For example, I would be the first person going if I wanted to make the word right here, rod, just for example. And then play, and you would play the word rod. What's really, really neat that I find helpful is the dictionary option. Scrabble, I believe it was last year, maybe a couple of years ago, they decided that in the new rules of Scrabble, you can use 2-letter words. Right here, it actually gives you a list of all the two-letter words that are playable on the game, which is really neat. So it starts with the A's and it goes all the way down here to the C's, and all of those 2-letter words are playable in the game. So Scrabble is definitely my new favorite app from the iStore. Definitely check it out today.
Thanks for checking out our first episode. You can find us online at rocktt.com, and you can also follow us on Twitter at Rocket Show and find out when our new episodes are being released. Thanks, we'll see you again.